would like to tell you a little bit about Robert Mondavi because he was, after all, the architect of much of the wine industry as it is today. Bob was an immigrant son. His father came in 1905 from Provincia delle Marche, actually Provincia di Ancona in Sassoferrato, a very poor state in Italy. If you go to the Adriatic from Florence and then go north, that would be Provincia delle Marche. And it had stone mines and so forth, and there was a brother that worked in Minnesota, so they decided to immigrate. And Cesare, when he was 20 years old, grabbed his bag, and it was probably a big Furashki with his belongings in it, and came to America. I have the ledger of when he came to Ellis Island, and it said Cesare Mondavi, age 20, Italian, single, going to Minnesota, $20. Yeah, $20. How he got from Ellis Island to Minnesota, maybe they grew up together, but he got there. And he worked in the mines there also, and 2 years later went back to Sassoferrato to pick up his 17-year-old sweetheart, Rosa. Cesare went to the 5th grade, was very intelligent, and Rosa never went to school. She had to, in Sassoferrato, as the girls did at that time, schlep the sheets to the cold river to wash them and make orecchiette or whatever pasta they made. So they started in Minnesota, in the cold part too, and he, however, got out of the mines and then had a little grocery store with some Italian products. Also had a boarding house which young Rosa ran, 20 also immigrants that she served for, made one meal a day. I don't know how they did it. And in the meantime, then had 4 children. So those were the Minnesota times. And she never really quite learned English and kind of partly forgot Italian. When we met, she worked a wonderful American Italian. Anyway, Cesare, because he was very smart, was also picked by this Italian community to come to California every year to buy grapes from which those poor Italians that were cold made wine in the bathtub. And he traveled through California and right away realized the best grapes come from this region. But they were also coming out of Lodi, where they then finally moved the family. And when I said this ledger where it says that he had $20 when he came to America, in 1923 he moved the family to California. 4 children, there were the 2 girls, Helen and Mary, and then there was Robert and Peter and Robert, okay? And by then he declared he had $29,000. I just want to say it is really an immigrant story. You know, they worked hard and they established themselves in Lodi, and he became then a shipper of grapes and later also fruit from California to the East Coast, you know, towns like Boston, Washington, New York, and so forth. And in the meantime, also dabbled a little bit in wine, got to be a partner in a little winery called Sunny St. Helena, and made a relatively good living, raised the family. And I have told this at the table, but I always think, because I'm also an immigrant, I'm an American by choice, I came originally from Switzerland, it makes a great story because the boys, when they were in high school, to make some money, they nailed boxes. The fruit and the grapes were always shipped in these plywood boxes. And Robert figured out it took 6 nails to make a box. He had exactly figured out which comes first, second, third, and he was a champion. One day he made 2,000 boxes. They got $0.015 per box, which, you know, numbers count, you know. And so, to make the story short, both boys went to Stanford, and you know, then things started to go. But Robert always wanted to be in business, loved the wine business, and in 1943, he very much was the movement that got the father to buy Charles Krug Winery. This was the oldest winery in Napa Valley, built in 1861. since 2000 had no inhabitant. Charles Cook died, had no heirs. It went into the hands of banks and speculators and was for sale. And father said, well, I'm quite happy, I've done well. What do I need now to start on a winery? And Robert said, we are here, and we are going to bring it back. It was in a dilapidated state, but a marvelous thing, you know. It was 180 fabulous acres with a winery, with the carriage house for aged, with 3 other houses. Just a beautiful property for $75,000, and I guess it took 10 or 15 cash to bank and did the balance, and the boys really brought it up. The first wine that I came to Napa Valley in 1960, and when you asked about a good wine, it was always Charles Cook Chenin Blanc. They had worked that already into a very quality wine. As you know, I don't have to tell secrets, there was a big separation between the boys, and there were different ideas. One was more for size, one was more for quality. So in 1966, they separated, Peter and Bob, and Bob felt he had enough time, enough energy, maybe some sons that were going to follow the dynasty, to maybe some knowledge to do his own thing, and he built the Robert Mondavi Winery. It was a very first winery built after Prohibition, so and Bob went for everything he could do to make this a new winery. He got, you know, stainless steel tanks for fermenters. He got the Sites Company to do all the filters and stuff like that. Bucher Guyer for the presses. French barrels for the aging. And the beautiful architect Cliff May to build the wine. With this idea, he never said better, but he could produce wine that would be in the company of the great wines of the world. And he looked also at the land, and I think this region here, Oakville, definitely would be the first growers of Napa. So that's how he started. I, on the other hand, started to work at Charles Cook as the lowly tour guide, the first female that they allowed in there to do anything, because it was a macho world, believe me, that wine business. I worked for $2 an hour, and when it rained, I was sent home. I loved the business so much. So I started sort of with some volunteer work for some other things. Well, anyway, and then when I was there about 2.5 years, and every day when I came to work, we had to hang our coats in the garage. The men stopped talking. All the others were men. They had stopped talking because they talked about me. What has this world come to? Since when does a woman know anything about wine, right? And I had to, really, it was a challenge. And I started to read books, and I started to become a member of the St. Helena Library, Wine Library, and some extension course. And after about 6 months, I said, I know as much as they do. What are they doing to me? But anyway, I had also my, sometimes a little comic, what they call in German, Schadenfreude. So it was interesting. But then, about 2.5 years into this, the boys split. The spirit was gone, although I never knew Robert Mondavi when I was at Charles Cook. I didn't know Peter either. They were kind of on an echelon making wine and selling wine, but we were giving tours. I also then got to know the mother. She waited for me in the morning when I came to work. I was the only one she could talk to because I speak Italian. So it was really a wonderful introductory time. I came here because I left Charles Cook. You know, I mean, it wasn't that big a job. And I started to paint again. And one day, a little group called North by Artists went out there. There was a marvelous water tower. We took out our palette and painted this scene. By the way, the scene hasn't changed. It looks just like that then. Maybe behind the trees there may be some houses, but in general it was the hill. And looked around, I said, there's something going on. Still in Stratford, I think there was an arch, and walked over, and the gentleman that used to work for Charles Griswold, dear Mr. Griswold, came out and said, Margaret, come on in, I want to show you. Robert Mondavi is building a winery. And, by the way, would you like to work for us? I need help. We're going to open this fall. Me? What am I doing? Well, you can be a tour guide again. So I realized how much I missed the wine world. And I started on November 3rd, 1967. My employment day goes back, making $2 an hour. Being the only female, because all those lazy guys from up there came down. They were retired firemen, retired policemen, retired teachers, making $2 an hour, and we started here. And it was so much fun. And this is where I got to know Robert Mondavi, because he was everywhere. He wanted to see how the walls were built. He went in the cellar in the morning to see how the wine was built. He picked up the pumice and ate it and said, He was everywhere. And also, at that time, you know, it's different times, the little group of us, when we were touring the tasting, and we had just a chain that we put out there on the gate. Before we put the chain up, we came together and we had a glass of wine. Nobody thought this was wrong. Well, a glass of wine before you go home. There was always some left over. So there Robert came, and he was always full of dreams, full of passions, what he was going to do. And I had some ideas too, and he was usually the guy that would listen to the ideas and then say, look, if it's good, don't talk about it, do it. And supported me very much. So I had this idea first of a little music festival. And I said, look, you got this beautiful lawn, and the arch could be a background. Can you have a little music? He said, well, it can't cost anything. I'll fix it. And we borrowed some chairs from the church, got the stage from the high school. I got some musicians from the Napa Valley Symphony, put a little group together, and now we had to advertise. When we made posters, there was no French Laundry or restaurants in Napa Valley at that time. The road from Highway 29 into Yountville was dirt. There were 21 bars in Yountville because at that time, by federal law, you could not sell alcohol in a radius that was less than 1.5 miles from the veterans' home. And all these veterans wanted to have drinks. So one bar after another popped up, and they were always down there. Napa had one taxi cab, Yountville had 10. Up and down they went for their little drinks. So anyway, a year later they rescinded the law, but when I came, that was still Yountville. So anyway, we had also not that many guests that came. As a matter of fact, Michael Mondavi said that sometimes he came down the road and made a very visible big left turn and hoped some cars would follow him so they would just come into the winery. We always said 1967 was the worst vintage year that you can imagine. It rained for 7 months. Rained all winter, rained all spring. And we said one day nobody would come. But the lowest we ever hit was 3 people. We never made the 0. So we went out there and we told the story. We didn't have the wines yet because we just had white wines, you know, the red ones were being made. So at that time we made Riesling and Traminer and Fumé Blanc, which of course was our signature wine. And then by next May, the Gamay came out. And we also made a wonderful Gamay Rosé. It looked like a jewel. It had 1.5 residual sugar and was delicious. Anyway, we did this, we told this story, and people kept coming. And every winemaker in the world finally came because they heard about a new winery. Where in France did they have stainless steel tanks? Did they have all this equipment and this spirit? Robert really spent his day all day long talking about it. And he would always grab bottles out of that closet. Was it a Margaux, a Lafite, a Latour, Aubryon? He had always a wine to compare. And he said, you tell me that we can make wine as good, never said better, as good. And it permeated. So then, with the summer festival, when we started with this little thing, we charged $2.50 and